The last entry in 17-year-old Maya Chen's diary was dated 3 days into the future, and it described her own funeral in vivid, haunting detail. When Detective Sarah Martinez first heard this impossible detail from Maya's devastated parents on that cold October morning, she thought it was just another tragic coincidence in what was already shaping up to be one of the most perplexing missing person cases of her 15-year career with law enforcement. But as the hours turned into days, and the entries in that worn leather journal began manifesting in reality with chilling, undeniable accuracy, Martinez realized she wasn't dealing with a simple runaway case or even a straightforward abduction. She was staring into something far more complex, disturbing, and inexplicable than anything she had ever encountered in her years of investigating human behavior and criminal activity. Maya Chen had been the kind of teenager who moved through life with quiet determination and an almost supernatural sense of purpose that her friends and family had always attributed to her mature personality and strong work ethic. Her parents, David and Lisa Chen, owned a small but remarkably successful accounting firm in the suburban town of Millbrook, Oregon, population exactly 18,247, according to the most recent census. The family lived in a modest but well-maintained two-story house on Maple Street, where the predictable sound of lawn mowers on Saturday mornings mixed harmoniously with the distant, constant hum of traffic from the interstate that connected their small, insular community to the bustling metropolitan area of Portland, exactly 43 minutes away by car during off-peak hours. Maya was a junior at Millbrook High School, where she had maintained a consistently solid B-plus average while simultaneously working part-time at the local bookstore, Page Turner Books, which was owned and operated by elderly Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had known Maya since she was 7 years old, and would sneak into the store to read picture books while her parents finished their weekly grocery shopping at the supermarket next door. The bookstore had become Maya's second home over the years, a sanctuary where she could lose herself in stories and help customers discover new worlds through literature. The Chen family had immigrated from Taiwan when Maya was just 3 years old, part of David's carefully planned strategy to expand his accounting expertise into the competitive American market. Lisa worked alongside her husband, handling the administrative side of their growing business with meticulous attention to detail, while Maya had grown up effortlessly straddling two distinct cultures with the natural ease of someone who had never known any different way of living. She spoke fluent Mandarin at home during family dinners, helped translate important documents for elderly clients who preferred to conduct their financial business in their native language, and harbored ambitious dreams of studying international business at Oregon State University after her graduation from high school. Maya's bedroom walls were covered with acceptance letters from various colleges, scholarship applications filled out in her careful handwriting, and a large world map dotted with colorful pins marking all the places she hoped to visit someday during her planned gap year before starting university. Her room was a perfect reflection of her personality, organized, ambitious, and filled with evidence of her careful planning for a future that seemed bright and full of possibilities. Maya's daily routine had been predictable and comforting in its absolute consistency, providing structure and stability that both she and her parents had come to depend upon. She woke up at exactly 6:30 each morning, helped her mother prepare breakfast while discussing the day's plans, walked the precisely measured 12 blocks to school with her best friend Emma Rodriguez, attended all her classes with perfect attendance, worked at the bookstore from 4 to 7 on weekdays, came home for family dinner at 7:30, completed her homework assignments with characteristic thoroughness, and spent the final hour before bed writing in her diary, a habit she had maintained religiously for over 3 years. This routine had been Maya's anchor for years, providing the stability and predictability that allowed her to excel academically while maintaining close relationships with her family and friends. The routine was so established and reliable that her sudden, inexplicable disappearance on Thursday, October 12th, was all the more shocking and incomprehensible to everyone who knew her well and had come to depend on her consistent, trustworthy nature. The morning of October 12th had started exactly like any other morning in the Chen household. Maya had breakfast with her parents, engaging in their usual conversation about her upcoming SAT prep class, whether she needed new winter boots before the season changed, and her excitement about a college fair that would be held at the high school the following week. Lisa later told investigators that Maya had seemed completely normal, perhaps even more cheerful and optimistic than usual, mentioning enthusiastically that she was excited about a new shipment of mystery novels that had arrived at the bookstore, and that she was particularly looking forward to helping Mrs. Henderson organize the elaborate window display that would showcase the new books. David remembered with crystal clarity that Maya had kissed both parents goodbye before leaving for school, something she had done every single day since early childhood, but that had become somewhat less frequent as she grew older and naturally developed more independence. He recalled that she had been wearing her favorite navy blue sweater, the one with small silver buttons that her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday, and that she had been carrying her worn leather backpack along with a small wrapped gift that she mentioned was for Mrs. Henderson's upcoming birthday celebration. Emma Rodriguez walked with Maya to school as usual that morning, following their established route through the quiet residential neighborhoods and past the small park where they had played together as children. Emma later told police investigators that their conversation had been filled with typical teenage chatter about an upcoming chemistry test that neither of them felt prepared for, Emma's ongoing romantic drama with her on and off boyfriend Marcus, and Maya's detailed plans to apply for a competitive summer internship at a nonprofit organization in Portland that focused on helping recent immigrants navigate the complex American business landscape. Emma noticed absolutely nothing unusual about Maya's behavior, demeanor, or conversation that morning, though she did remember that Maya had been carrying a small, carefully wrapped gift in her backpack, which she had mentioned was for Mrs. Henderson's birthday celebration the following week. This seemingly innocent detail would later prove significant in ways that none of them could have anticipated at the time. Maya attended all her classes that day with her usual diligence and engagement. Her teachers uniformly reported that she had participated normally in classroom discussions, turned in her assignments on time with her characteristic attention to detail, and showed absolutely no signs of distress, unusual behavior, or any indication that she was planning to disappear. Her chemistry teacher, Mr. Davidson, even specifically complimented her on her dramatically improved understanding of complex molecular structures during their afternoon lab session, noting that her questions demonstrated a deeper comprehension of the material than she had previously shown. Maya ate lunch with her usual group of close friends, including Emma, Sarah Kim, and Marcus Thompson, spending the time discussing their plans for the upcoming homecoming dance and debating whether they should all attend together as a group rather than worry about the social pressure of finding individual dates. The conversation was lighthearted and filled with the kind of planning and anticipation that suggested Maya was fully engaged with her immediate future and had no intention of disappearing. The last confirmed sighting of Maya Chen occurred at exactly 6:45 p.m. on October 12th, when she left Page Turner Books after completing her scheduled shift. Mrs. Henderson later told investigators that Maya had seemed particularly focused and content that evening, spending most of her time carefully organizing the new fiction section and engaging in enthusiastic conversations with customers about book recommendations. Maya had helped an elderly customer locate a specific mystery novel that had been out of print for several years, methodically restocked the young adult section according to the new organizational system she had developed, and even convinced a hesitant teenager to try reading a book outside his usual preferred genre. Mrs. Henderson remembered Maya saying goodbye with her usual warm, genuine smile, promising to see her the next day, and specifically reminding the older woman about the book club meeting that was scheduled for Saturday morning. Maya had seemed excited about the upcoming meeting, during which they would be discussing a novel about time travel and destiny that had sparked particularly interesting conversations among the regular participants. The 12-block walk from Page Turner Books to the Chen family home typically took Maya approximately 20 minutes, following a route she had traveled safely hundreds of times over the years. The familiar path took her down Main Street, past the post office where she occasionally picked up packages for her parents, past the small park where she had played as a child, and still sometimes stopped to read when the weather was particularly nice, and then through a quiet residential neighborhood where she knew most of the families by name and often stopped to chat with neighbors who were outside tending their gardens or walking their dogs. Streetlights illuminated the entire route adequately, and several neighbors would typically be outside during the early evening hours, providing natural surveillance and a sense of security for anyone walking through the area. The neighborhood had always been considered extremely safe, with virtually no crime and a strong sense of community that made residents feel comfortable allowing their children to walk alone even after dark. But on October 12th, Maya Chen never made it home, vanishing somewhere along that familiar, well-lit route without leaving any trace of what had happened to her or where she might have gone. When Maya hadn't arrived home by 7:30 that evening, Lisa Chen began to feel the first stirrings of genuine worry. Maya was naturally punctual and responsible, almost to a fault, and she always called home if she was going to be late, even by just 15 minutes. Lisa immediately called the bookstore, but Mrs. Henderson confirmed that Maya had left at her usual time and had seemed completely normal when she departed. Lisa then systematically called Emma and several other close friends, but none of them had seen or heard from Maya since school had ended that afternoon. By 8 o'clock, David Chen was driving slowly along the route between the bookstore and their home, carefully scanning both sides of the street for any sign of his daughter or any indication of what might have happened to her. He checked the park, the post office, and even stopped at several houses along the way to ask if anyone had seen Maya or noticed anything unusual. The growing darkness and the absence of any clues only intensified his fear and confusion. At exactly 8:30, the Chens made the decision that would officially begin one of the most baffling missing person cases in the history of Millbrook. They called the local police department, their voices filled with a combination of fear, confusion, and desperate hope that somehow Maya would walk through the front door before the officers arrived. Officer Jennifer Walsh was the first law enforcement official to respond to the call, arriving at the Chen family home at 8:45 p.m. to take the initial missing person report. Walsh had been a patrol officer for 8 years and had handled numerous missing person cases during her career, most of which had resolved themselves within hours when the missing person returned home or made contact with worried family members. But something about the genuine fear in David and Lisa Chen's voices, combined with their detailed, convincing description of Maya's predictable routine and naturally responsible character, made Walsh take the case seriously from the very beginning. The first phase of the investigation began immediately and followed standard police protocols for missing person cases. Officer Walsh conducted a thorough, systematic interview with Maya's parents, carefully documenting every detail of her daily routine, her relationships with friends and family members, her emotional state in the days leading up to her disappearance, and any potential reasons she might have had for leaving home voluntarily. The Chens provided a recent photograph of Maya, taken just 2 weeks earlier at a family gathering, along with a detailed description of the clothing she had been wearing that morning, and a comprehensive list of all her friends, teachers, employers, and anyone else she might potentially contact. David Chen emphasized repeatedly that Maya had been genuinely excited about her college applications and had been making detailed, enthusiastic plans for her future, which made it seem highly unlikely that she would suddenly decide to disappear without explanation. Lisa provided Officer Walsh with Maya's cell phone number, her social media account information, and the passwords to her various online accounts, demonstrating their close relationship and Maya's lack of secretiveness about her digital life. By Friday morning, Detective Sarah Martinez had been officially assigned to lead the investigation into Maya's disappearance. Martinez had joined the Millbrook Police Department after spending 5 intensive years with the Portland Police Bureau, specifically requesting a transfer to a smaller community where she could focus on individual cases that might otherwise get lost in the overwhelming caseload of a larger city. She had built a solid reputation for her meticulous attention to detail, her ability to connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information, and her compassionate approach to working with families during their most difficult moments. When Martinez first walked into the Chen family home on Friday afternoon, she could immediately feel the weight of the family's fear, confusion, and desperate hope. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of normal daily life now felt hollow and expectant, as if everyone was holding their breath and waiting for Maya to walk through the front door with a reasonable explanation for her absence. The initial investigation followed all standard protocols and procedures for missing person cases. Martinez and her team conducted extensive interviews with Maya's friends, teachers, and co-workers, carefully looking for any indication of unusual behavior, relationship problems, academic stress, or external pressures that might have contributed to a decision to leave home. They thoroughly reviewed Maya's social media accounts, finding nothing more interesting or concerning than typical teenage posts about homework assignments, book recommendations, and casual plans with friends. Maya's last social media post had been uploaded at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, just over an hour before she disappeared. It was a photograph of the new book display at Page Turner Books, posted to Instagram with the caption, "Can't wait for people to discover these amazing stories." The post had received several likes and comments from friends, all of which were positive and normal. There was absolutely nothing in Maya's digital footprint that suggested she had been planning to disappear, or that she had been experiencing any kind of crisis. The physical search for Maya began on Friday evening and involved police officers, firefighters, and dozens of community volunteers who had organized themselves into systematic search teams. They carefully walked the entire route between the bookstore and the Chen family home, searching for any trace of Maya or any clues about what might have happened to her during that 20-minute walk. The search was then expanded to include the nearby park, the wooded areas on the outskirts of town, and the commercial district where Maya might have stopped for any reason. Professional search dogs were brought in to follow Maya's scent trail, but the results were frustratingly inconclusive. The dogs were able to track her scent from the bookstore to approximately the halfway point of her usual route home, but then the trail went completely cold at the intersection of Main Street and Oak Avenue, where multiple scents from pedestrians and exhaust fumes from vehicles had likely contaminated the area and made it impossible for the dogs to continue tracking. Security cameras from local businesses were collected and reviewed frame by frame, but the footage was disappointingly limited and provided few useful clues. The cameras from the post office and the small grocery store clearly showed Maya walking past at approximately 6:50 p.m., appearing completely calm and unhurried, checking her phone briefly but not stopping to talk to anyone or showing any signs of distress. The cameras from the residential areas along her route were either non-existent or positioned in ways that didn't capture the sidewalks where Maya would have been walking. The last clear image of Maya showed her walking past Henderson's Pharmacy at exactly 6:52 p.m., and then she seemed to simply vanish into the growing darkness of the October evening. The absence of any additional camera footage or witness sightings after that point created a frustrating gap in the timeline that made it impossible to determine what had happened to her during the final 10 minutes of her journey home. Martinez conducted multiple interviews with Mrs. Henderson, carefully exploring every detail of Maya's behavior and conversations during her final shift at the bookstore. The elderly woman was clearly devastated by Maya's disappearance, describing her as one of the most reliable, caring, and mature young people she had ever known. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Maya had been particularly interested in the psychology and mystery sections of the store lately, often staying after her shift to read books about criminal behavior, unexplained disappearances, and the psychology of missing person cases. While this interest initially struck Martinez as potentially significant, Mrs. Henderson insisted that Maya's fascination with these topics had seemed purely academic rather than personal, as if she was researching for a school project or simply satisfying her natural curiosity about human nature and the mysteries of criminal behavior. Maya had asked thoughtful questions about the books she was reading, and had even recommended several titles to customers who were interested in true crime stories. As the weekend passed without any sign of Maya or any significant developments in the case, the investigation expanded to include neighboring communities and state-level resources. Martinez contacted the FBI's National Crime Information Center to enter Maya's information into their comprehensive database, and she reached out to police departments in surrounding areas to alert them about the case and request their assistance in looking for any sign of Maya or any similar cases that might be related. The Chen family organized increasingly extensive search parties that covered wider and wider areas around Millbrook, with community members donating their time, food, and resources to support the ongoing effort. Local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Maya's photograph during their evening broadcasts and asking viewers to call with any information that might help locate her. The story began to receive regional attention as the mystery of Maya's disappearance deepened, and no clear explanation emerged. The emotional toll on the Chen family was absolutely devastating, and became more severe with each passing day. Lisa Chen barely slept, spending hours calling Maya's cell phone even though it consistently went straight to voicemail, and obsessively refreshing her social media accounts, hoping for some sign of activity or communication. David Chen alternated between organizing search efforts with military-like precision and sitting alone in Maya's bedroom, carefully examining every possession and piece of paper for any clue they might have overlooked. The house that had once been filled with the comfortable sounds of daily family life now felt hollow and expectant, as if everyone was holding their breath and waiting for Maya to walk through the front door with a reasonable explanation for her absence. Neighbors brought food and offered support, but nothing could fill the void left by Maya's disappearance, or ease the growing fear that something terrible had happened to her. By Sunday evening, October 15th, the investigation had reached a frustrating and seemingly insurmountable stalemate. Martinez had personally interviewed more than 50 people, including friends, family members, teachers, neighbors, and anyone else who had known Maya or might have seen her on the day she disappeared. She had reviewed countless hours of security footage from every available camera in the area, coordinated extensive searches covering a 10-mile radius from Maya's last known location, and consulted with FBI behavioral analysts about the possibility that Maya had been abducted by a stranger. The lack of physical evidence, witnesses, or any clear motive made it extremely difficult to develop concrete leads or determine what had actually happened to Maya. The case was receiving significant media attention throughout the Pacific Northwest, with Maya's photograph appearing regularly on local news broadcasts and social media platforms, but despite the widespread publicity, no useful tips or sightings had been reported. It was on Monday morning, October 16th, that Lisa Chen made the discovery that would completely transform the investigation from a standard missing person case into something far more complex, mysterious, and deeply disturbing. Lisa had been spending time in Maya's bedroom, partly as a way to feel closer to her missing daughter, and partly because she couldn't bear to leave the room completely untouched any longer. She was carefully organizing Maya's desk, going through drawers and papers with meticulous attention, when she noticed that one of the desk drawers was slightly ajar, revealing the corner of a brown leather journal that Lisa had never seen before. The diary was bound in soft, well-worn brown leather with a small brass clasp that had been polished smooth by regular use. It appeared to be a high-quality journal that had been used extensively but maintained with careful attention. Lisa opened it expecting to find typical teenage thoughts and experiences, perhaps some insight into Maya's emotional state or relationships that might help explain her disappearance or provide clues about where she might have gone. Instead, she found herself reading entries that made absolutely no sense in the context of what she knew about her daughter's life and recent experiences. The earliest entries were dated from early September and described events that had actually occurred in Maya's life with perfect accuracy. There were detailed accounts of her first day of junior year, complete with descriptions of her new teachers and classmates, her genuine excitement about getting increased hours at the bookstore, and her natural nervousness about beginning intensive SAT preparation. These entries were written in Maya's familiar, careful handwriting and captured her distinctive voice and personality perfectly, including her tendency to analyze situations from multiple perspectives and her habit of making detailed lists of goals and plans. But as Lisa continued reading through the diary, she began to notice that the entries were describing events that she didn't remember happening, conversations that she had never heard about, and situations that seemed completely unfamiliar. The entry dated September 20th described in vivid detail a dramatic confrontation between Maya and Mrs. Henderson about a customer who had attempted to shoplift a rare, expensive book from the store. The entry included specific dialogue, emotional reactions, and consequences that seemed completely realistic. But when Lisa later called Mrs. Henderson to ask about this incident, the elderly woman had no memory of any such event occurring. The entry for September 25th provided a detailed eyewitness account of a minor car accident that Maya had supposedly observed on her way to school. The entry included specific descriptions of the vehicles involved, the extent of the damage, the behavior of the drivers, and the response of emergency personnel who arrived at the scene. Maya had written about feeling shaken by witnessing the accident and had reflected on the fragility of life and the importance of being careful. But when Lisa checked the local police reports for that date, she could find no record of any car accident occurring along Maya's route to school. As Lisa read further into the diary, she realized with growing confusion and alarm that the entries were becoming increasingly focused on events that she was absolutely certain had never happened. The entry for October 5th described Maya having a lengthy emotional conversation with Emma Rodriguez about Emma's detailed plans to transfer to a different school in another state because of her parents' work situation. The entry included specific details about Emma's fears, her concerns about leaving her friends, and her mixed feelings about the opportunity for a fresh start. But Emma had never mentioned any such plans to Maya's parents, and when Lisa later called Emma's mother, she confirmed that their family had no plans to relocate. The entry for October 10th described Maya's enthusiastic involvement in organizing a school-wide food drive to benefit local homeless shelters. The entry included detailed descriptions of planning meetings, volunteer coordination, and Maya's leadership role in the project. She had written about feeling proud of her ability to motivate her classmates and about the importance of community service. But when Lisa contacted the school's administration, they had no record of any such food drive being planned or organized by students. The most disturbing discovery came when Lisa reached the final entries in the diary, which were dated after Maya's disappearance. The entry dated October 13th, the day after Maya had vanished, described Maya's own funeral in vivid, heartbreaking detail. She had written about the flowers that would be chosen, including white lilies and yellow roses that had been her favorites since childhood. She described the songs that would be sung, including a hymn that her grandmother had taught her in Mandarin, and a contemporary song that had special meaning to her family. She wrote about the words that would be spoken by family members and friends, including specific phrases and memories that captured her relationships with different people. The entry described her parents' grief with devastating accuracy, including details about how her mother would be unable to stop crying and how her father would struggle to find words to express his loss. She wrote about Detective Martinez's continued investigation and the frustration of not having clear answers about what had happened to her. She described the community's response to her disappearance, including the search efforts, the media attention, and the way people would come together to support her family during their time of need. The entry dated October 14th described the discovery of the diary itself in terms that made Lisa's blood run cold. Maya had written about her mother finding the journal in her desk drawer, about Lisa's initial confusion and growing fear as she read through the entries, and about the difficult decision to contact Detective Martinez about the diary's contents. The entry even included specific phrases and questions that Lisa had not yet spoken aloud, but that perfectly captured her thoughts and emotional reactions as she read through the impossible entries. Maya had written about her mother's disbelief and the way Lisa would struggle to understand how the diary could contain accurate descriptions of events that had not yet occurred. She had predicted that Lisa would initially suspect that someone else had written the entries, but that the handwriting analysis would confirm that Maya herself had written every word. She had even described the specific way that Lisa would hold the diary, with trembling hands and a growing sense of terror about what the entries might mean. The final entry was dated October 15th, and it described a search of the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town that had not yet been conducted. Maya had written about the clues that would be found there, including a specific piece of evidence that would be discovered in a particular location within the building. She had described the person who would be revealed as responsible for her disappearance, including details about their background, their motivations, and their methods. She had written about her own fate with a detached, almost clinical tone that was completely unlike her usual emotional and personal writing style. Lisa Chen sat in her daughter's bedroom, holding the diary with trembling hands, trying to process what she had just read. The entries were unquestionably written in Maya's distinctive handwriting, with her characteristic way of forming letters and her habit of drawing small stars in the margins when she was thinking about something particularly important. But the content was absolutely impossible to explain or understand. How could Maya have written about events that had not yet occurred? How could she have described her own funeral and the discovery of the diary itself with such accurate, specific detail? When Lisa called Detective Martinez to report the discovery of the diary, Martinez initially assumed that the journal would contain typical teenage concerns, relationship problems, or perhaps some indication of Maya's emotional state before her disappearance that might provide clues about where she had gone or why she had left. But when Lisa described the content of the entries, particularly the predictions about future events and the description of Maya's own funeral, Martinez realized that she was dealing with something completely unprecedented in her extensive experience with missing person cases. Martinez arrived at the Chen family home within 30 minutes of Lisa's call, accompanied by Officer Walsh and a detective from the state police who specialized in unusual and complex cases. Martinez's first instinct was to approach the diary with healthy skepticism and careful analysis. She had seen cases where family members had created false evidence to keep investigations active, and she had encountered situations where missing persons had deliberately planted misleading clues to confuse investigators and cover their tracks. But as Martinez read through the diary entries, she found herself confronting details that would have been impossible for anyone to fabricate or predict. The entry describing her own involvement in the case included accurate information about her professional background with the Portland Police Bureau that was not public knowledge, and it referenced specific investigative techniques and procedures that she had planned to use but had not yet implemented. The entry seemed to demonstrate an intimate knowledge of police procedures and Martinez's personal approach to investigating missing person cases. The entry describing the discovery of the diary included direct quotes from conversations that had not yet taken place, and it accurately predicted the reactions and responses of everyone involved in the investigation. As Martinez read the predictions about her own behavior, thoughts, and investigative decisions, she felt a deeply disturbing sense of recognition, as if she was reading a detailed script for a play that she was unknowingly performing. Martinez decided to test the diary's apparent predictive accuracy by carefully comparing its entries with events that had actually occurred since Maya's disappearance. The entry for October 13th had specifically predicted that Emma Rodriguez would call the Chen family at exactly 3:17 p.m. to ask about organizing a candlelight vigil for Maya in the town park. Lisa confirmed that Emma had indeed called at precisely that time with exactly that request, using almost the identical words that had been written in the diary. The entry had also predicted that David Chen would receive a call from a reporter at exactly 7:30 p.m. asking for a statement about the investigation and Maya's disappearance. David confirmed that such a call had occurred at precisely the predicted time, and that the reporter had asked the specific questions that Maya had written about in her diary entry. The accuracy of these predictions, down to the exact minute and the specific wording of conversations, was impossible to explain through coincidence or lucky guessing. The entry for October 14th had predicted that Martinez would decide to expand the search efforts to include the industrial area on the north side of town, and that she would request additional resources from the state police to conduct a more thorough and systematic investigation. Martinez realized that she had indeed made both of these decisions, even though she had not yet acted on them or communicated them to anyone when Lisa first called about the diary's discovery. As Martinez continued to systematically compare the diary entries with actual events, she found that the predictions were accurate, not just in their general content, but in even the smallest, most specific details. The entry for October 15th had predicted that Mrs. Henderson would close the bookstore early to join the search efforts, and that she would bring homemade sandwiches and hot coffee for the volunteers. It had predicted that the search would be delayed by unexpected rainfall, and that a local television news crew would arrive to film the search efforts for the evening broadcast. All of these predictions had come true exactly as described in Maya's diary, with a level of accuracy that seemed to defy rational explanation. The realization that the diary appeared to be genuinely predictive forced Martinez to confront the possibility that Maya's disappearance was far more complex and mysterious than a simple abduction or runaway case. If Maya had somehow been able to predict future events, including her own disappearance, then the investigation needed to focus on understanding how she had acquired this apparent ability and whether it was somehow connected to her disappearance. Martinez began conducting follow-up interviews with Maya's friends and family members, specifically asking about any previous instances of Maya seemingly predicting future events or demonstrating any kind of unusual intuitive abilities. Emma Rodriguez initially insisted that Maya had never shown any signs of psychic abilities or supernatural gifts, but under careful questioning, she began to remember several occasions when Maya had made casual comments about future events that had later come true with surprising accuracy. Emma recalled that Maya had once mentioned that their chemistry teacher would be absent on a specific day due to a family emergency, and that the substitute teacher would cancel the planned laboratory experiment because of safety concerns. When this prediction came true exactly as Maya had described, Emma had assumed it was just a fortunate guess, or perhaps Maya had overheard some conversation that had given her inside information about the teacher's plans. Sarah Kim, another of Maya's close friends, remembered that Maya had once predicted that a specific book would be delivered to the bookstore on a particular day, even though Mrs. Henderson had told her that the shipment had been delayed and wouldn't arrive for at least another week. When the book arrived exactly when Maya had predicted, Sarah had attributed it to Maya's good relationship with the book distributor rather than any supernatural ability to predict the future. Marcus Thompson recalled that Maya had seemed to have an uncanny ability to know about pop quizzes and test dates before they were officially announced by teachers, and that she had once warned him about a surprise locker inspection that had occurred exactly as she had predicted. Marcus had assumed that Maya was simply better at reading their teachers' behavioral patterns and subtle cues than he was, and he had never considered the possibility that she might have been demonstrating some kind of psychic ability. As Martinez gathered these testimonies from Maya's friends, she began to realize that Maya's apparent ability to predict future events was not a recent development, but rather a pattern that had been gradually building over several months. The diary entries suggested that Maya had been increasingly aware of her unusual ability and had been systematically documenting her predictions as a way to understand and potentially control this mysterious gift. Mrs. Henderson provided the most significant insight into Maya's mental state and preoccupations during the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She revealed that Maya had been asking increasingly sophisticated and detailed questions about psychology, human behavior, and the nature of time and consciousness. Maya had been particularly interested in books about precognition, prophetic dreams, and various types of unexplained phenomena that seemed to challenge conventional understanding of reality. Mrs. Henderson had initially assumed that Maya was conducting research for a school project or college application essay, but she now realized that Maya might have been trying to understand her own experiences and find explanations for the predictions that she had been making. Maya had been especially interested in books written by psychologists and scientists who had studied people claiming to have psychic abilities, and she had asked detailed questions about the difference between genuine psychic phenomena and elaborate hoaxes or psychological tricks. The investigation took a dramatic and unexpected turn when Martinez decided to test the diary's most specific and detailed prediction. The entry for October 15th had described a search of the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Road, predicting that investigators would find a specific piece of evidence in a particular location within the building. According to the diary, this evidence would lead to a significant breakthrough in the case and would provide crucial information about Maya's disappearance. Martinez organized a comprehensive search team to investigate the warehouse on the morning of October 16th. The building had been abandoned for over a decade, previously used by a small manufacturing company that had relocated to another state when their business expanded. The structure was in poor condition, with broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and debris scattered throughout the interior. Martinez had not previously considered the warehouse as a potential location for evidence related to Maya's disappearance, but the diary's accurate predictions about other events gave her confidence that this search would be worthwhile. The search team spent several hours methodically examining the warehouse, using metal detectors and trained search dogs to look for any trace of Maya or evidence related to her disappearance. They found the typical debris and remnants of an abandoned building, including old manufacturing equipment, scattered papers, and clear evidence of occasional use by homeless individuals and teenagers looking for a place to gather away from adult supervision. It was Officer Walsh who made the crucial discovery, finding a small object wedged between two pieces of fallen ceiling tile in the exact location that had been described in Maya's diary. The object was a silver bracelet that Lisa Chen immediately recognized as belonging to Maya, a gift from her grandmother that Maya had worn almost daily for the past 2 years. The bracelet was clean and appeared to have been placed deliberately rather than lost accidentally during some kind of struggle. Attached to the bracelet was a small piece of paper with a message written in Maya's distinctive handwriting. "The truth is not what you think it is. Look for the person who knows about the diary but pretends not to. The answer is closer than you realize, and the danger is not yet over." This discovery validated the diary's predictive accuracy, while simultaneously raising entirely new questions about Maya's disappearance. If Maya had been able to predict that the bracelet would be found in the warehouse, had she placed it there herself? Was her disappearance voluntary? And if so, why had she chosen to disappear in such a mysterious and frightening way? The note suggested that someone close to the investigation was not being truthful about their knowledge of Maya's abilities, and that the case was more complex than anyone had realized. Martinez began systematically re-interviewing everyone who had been involved in the case, this time focusing specifically on their knowledge of Maya's diary and her apparent ability to predict future events. She paid particular attention to body language, inconsistencies in statements, and any signs that people were withholding information or not being completely honest about their relationships with Maya. The breakthrough came when Martinez conducted a more detailed interview with Mrs. Henderson about Maya's interest in books about precognition and unexplained phenomena. Under careful questioning, Mrs. Henderson revealed that Maya had not just been reading about these topics independently, but had been actively discussing them with someone who had been encouraging her interest and providing additional resources and information. Mrs. Henderson described this person as a middle-aged man who had introduced himself as Dr. James Morrison, claiming to be a psychology professor from Portland State University who was conducting research on psychic phenomena in adolescents. He had been visiting the bookstore regularly for several weeks, claiming to be studying cases of young people who seemed to demonstrate unusual intuitive abilities or psychic gifts. Dr. Morrison had been meeting with Maya privately, discussing her experiences and helping her understand her apparent abilities. Mrs. Henderson had assumed that Maya's parents were aware of these meetings and had approved of their daughter's participation in what seemed to be legitimate academic research, but she now realized with growing alarm that Maya had been keeping these meetings completely secret from her family. Martinez's investigation into Dr. James Morrison revealed that no one by that name was currently employed by Portland State University's psychology department, and that the business card he had given to Mrs. Henderson contained a disconnected phone number and a false address that led to an empty office building. The university had no record of any research being conducted on psychic phenomena in adolescents, and the department head confirmed that no one matching Morrison's description had any affiliation with their institution. Further investigation revealed that the real James Morrison was not a psychology professor at all, but rather a 34-year-old man with an extensive criminal history involving the manipulation and exploitation of vulnerable teenagers and young adults. Morrison had been arrested in 3 different states for various forms of fraud, identity theft, and psychological manipulation, often targeting young people who felt isolated, misunderstood, or different from their peers. His method involved identifying teenagers who demonstrated unusual sensitivity, intuition, or emotional vulnerability, then convincing them that they possessed special abilities that needed to be developed away from the influence of family and friends who wouldn't understand their gifts. Martinez realized that Maya's diary entries might not have been genuinely predictive at all, but rather the result of careful manipulation by someone who had been orchestrating events to make Maya believe she could predict the future. Morrison could have used his knowledge of the local community, his ability to influence other people's behavior, and his sophisticated understanding of Maya's personality to create the elaborate illusion that her predictions were coming true through supernatural means. The investigation into Morrison's recent activities revealed that he had been living in a rented cabin approximately 15 miles outside of Millbrook, using a false identity and paying his rent in cash to avoid creating any paper trail that could be traced back to his real name. Martinez obtained a search warrant for the cabin and organized a coordinated raid for the morning of October 17th, exactly as had been predicted in Maya's diary. The cabin was sparsely furnished but contained extensive evidence of Morrison's obsessive study of Maya and her daily routine. The investigators found detailed notes about Maya's schedule, personality traits, and relationships, including comprehensive maps of her typical routes around town, copies of her school schedule that he had somehow obtained, and dozens of photographs taken without her knowledge or consent. Morrison had been studying Maya's life with obsessive attention to detail, learning everything he could about her personality, her vulnerabilities, and her relationships with family and friends. Among Morrison's possessions, Martinez discovered a detailed plan for Maya's disappearance that included predictions about how the investigation would proceed and how various people would react to her disappearance. Morrison had been manipulating events from behind the scenes, using his sophisticated knowledge of human psychology to create the convincing illusion that Maya's predictions were coming true through psychic abilities rather than careful orchestration. He had arranged for the delayed book delivery that Maya had predicted by contacting the distributor and requesting a change in the shipping schedule. He had influenced the chemistry teacher's decision to take a day off by making an anonymous phone call claiming to be from the school administration with information about a family emergency. He had been orchestrating dozens of small events and coincidences that made Maya believe she possessed genuine supernatural abilities when she was actually being manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to create the illusion of psychic powers. The most disturbing discovery was a series of letters that Morrison had been writing to Maya over several weeks, encouraging her to trust her abilities and gradually suggesting that she needed to distance herself from her family and friends in order to fully develop her potential. The letters played on Maya's natural insecurities about being different, her concerns about disappointing her parents with her college and career choices, and her normal teenage desire for independence and adventure. Morrison's psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and gradual, designed to make Maya feel special and chosen while simultaneously isolating her from her support network. He had convinced her that her family and friends wouldn't understand her gifts, and that she needed to work with him in secret to develop her abilities safely. The letters revealed that Morrison had been planning Maya's disappearance for several weeks, carefully building her trust and dependence on his guidance. Morrison's plan had been to convince Maya that she needed to disappear temporarily in order to protect her family from the dangerous consequences of her psychic abilities, and that he was the only person who could help her understand and control her gifts safely. The diary had been a central part of his manipulation, with Morrison providing Maya with detailed information about future events that he then arranged to have occur exactly as she had written them. The final phase of the investigation began when Martinez discovered that Morrison had been using a second property, a small isolated house in a heavily wooded area approximately 30 miles from Millbrook, where he had been planning to take Maya after convincing her to leave home voluntarily. The house was extremely isolated and difficult to access, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a single, poorly maintained dirt road that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to find her without specific knowledge of the location. Martinez organized a joint operation with the state police and the FBI to search the property on the morning of October 18th. The operation was planned with military precision, with multiple teams approaching from different directions to ensure that Morrison could not escape if he was present at the location, and to maximize the chances of finding Maya alive if she was being held there against her will. The search team found Maya Chen alive, but in a state of severe psychological confusion and emotional distress. She had been living in the remote house for 6 days, believing that she was there voluntarily to develop her psychic abilities and protect her family from dangerous supernatural forces that Morrison had convinced her were drawn to people with her gifts. Morrison had convinced her that her disappearance was necessary for the safety of everyone she loved, and that her family would be harmed if she attempted to return home before she had learned to properly control her abilities. Morrison was arrested at the scene without any resistance, and Maya was immediately taken to a hospital for comprehensive medical evaluation and psychological assessment. She was physically unharmed, but emotionally traumatized by the gradual realization that her supposed psychic abilities had been an elaborate deception, and that she had been systematically manipulated into abandoning her family and friends by someone who had exploited her trust and vulnerability. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been planning Maya's abduction for several months, carefully studying her personality, routine, and psychological vulnerabilities to determine the most effective way to manipulate her into trusting him and following his instructions. He had identified her love of reading and her natural respect for authority figures, then used these traits to gain her trust by presenting himself as a legitimate researcher and expert on psychic phenomena. Morrison's manipulation had been extraordinarily sophisticated and psychologically complex. He had created a false identity complete with fake credentials and references, established credibility through his apparent knowledge of psychology and paranormal phenomena, and then systematically isolated Maya from her support network by convincing her that her family and friends would not understand her special abilities. He had exploited her natural teenage insecurities and her desire to be special and important to make her believe that she was chosen for a higher purpose that required secrecy and sacrifice. The diary had been the centerpiece of Morrison's elaborate psychological manipulation. He had provided Maya with detailed information about events that he then carefully arranged to occur, creating the convincing illusion that her predictions were coming true through supernatural means rather than human orchestration. He had used his sophisticated understanding of human psychology to predict how people would react to Maya's disappearance, and he had included these predictions in the diary entries that Maya believed she was writing spontaneously under the influence of her psychic abilities. Morrison had even predicted the discovery of the diary itself, knowing that Maya's parents would eventually find it, and that the apparent accuracy of its predictions would generate intense interest and confusion among investigators. He had planted the bracelet in the warehouse as a way to validate the diary's credibility and to direct the investigation toward the conclusion that Maya possessed genuine psychic abilities, while simultaneously providing a clue that would eventually lead back to him when the time was right. The case concluded with Morrison being charged with kidnapping, fraud, child endangerment, and psychological abuse. His trial revealed the full extent of his manipulation and the sophisticated psychological techniques he had used to control Maya's behavior and decision-making. Expert witnesses testified about the methods commonly used by predators who target vulnerable teenagers, and about the long-term psychological effects of this type of systematic manipulation and abuse. Maya Chen required extensive psychological counseling and therapy to recover from the trauma of her experience and to rebuild her sense of self-trust and judgment. She struggled with intense feelings of embarrassment, self-blame, and confusion, questioning her own intelligence and wondering how she had been so completely deceived by someone who had seemed so trustworthy and knowledgeable. Her recovery was supported by her family, friends, and the entire Millbrook community, who rallied around her with understanding, compassion, and unwavering support. The diary that had seemed to predict the future became a crucial piece of evidence in Morrison's trial, demonstrating the elaborate lengths to which he had gone to create the illusion of Maya's psychic abilities, and to manipulate her into trusting him completely. The case became a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of teenagers to sophisticated psychological manipulation by adults who prey on their natural insecurities, desire for acceptance, and need to feel special and important. Detective Martinez later reflected on the case as one of the most complex, disturbing, and educational investigations of her entire career. The combination of psychological manipulation, careful planning, and exploitation of a teenager's natural vulnerabilities had created a situation that challenged her understanding of human behavior and the nature of criminal predation. She noted that Morrison's success had depended entirely on his ability to identify and exploit Maya's specific psychological needs and insecurities, and that his methods could potentially have been effective with many other teenagers who shared similar personality traits and circumstances. The case also highlighted the critical importance of open, honest communication between parents and teenagers, and the need for adults to be constantly aware of the warning signs that a young person might be being manipulated or exploited by someone outside their immediate family circle. Maya's parents had been loving, supportive, and involved in her life, but they had not been aware of her meetings with Morrison or her growing belief in her supposed psychic abilities because she had been convinced to keep these experiences secret. Mrs. Henderson was profoundly affected by her unwitting role in Morrison's manipulation of Maya. She had genuinely believed that Morrison was a legitimate researcher conducting important academic work, and she had encouraged Maya's interest in books about psychic phenomena, without realizing that this interest was being deliberately cultivated and exploited by someone with malicious intentions. She became a passionate advocate for greater awareness of the tactics used by predators who target teenagers, and she worked closely with local schools and community organizations to educate students, parents, and other adults about the warning signs of manipulation and exploitation. The Millbrook community was deeply impacted by Maya's disappearance and the shocking revelation of Morrison's elaborate deception and psychological manipulation. The case demonstrated that even in a small, close-knit community with strong social connections and community involvement, teenagers could still be vulnerable to sophisticated predators who used psychological manipulation rather than physical force or obvious coercion to achieve their goals. Community leaders implemented comprehensive new programs to educate parents, teenagers, and community members about the tactics commonly used by predators who target young people both online and in person. These programs focused on helping people recognize the warning signs of manipulation, understand the psychological techniques used by predators to gain trust and compliance, and know how to seek help when they suspected that someone might be being targeted or exploited. Maya's recovery was gradual but steady, marked by both setbacks and significant progress. She returned to school after several weeks of intensive counseling and therapy, and she was able to rebuild her relationships with her friends and family members who had been terrified by her disappearance. She struggled with ongoing trust issues and periods of self-doubt, but she also developed a much deeper understanding of human psychology and the critical importance of maintaining healthy skepticism and critical thinking skills. Maya became an advocate for other teenagers who had been victims of manipulation and exploitation, working with law enforcement agencies, schools, and community organizations to help them understand the psychological tactics used by predators and to develop more effective prevention and intervention strategies. Her first-hand experience with Morrison's manipulation gave her unique insights into how predators operate and how young people can be better protected from these sophisticated forms of abuse. The diary that had seemed to predict the future was eventually returned to Maya after Morrison's trial concluded, and all appeals had been exhausted. She chose to keep it as a powerful reminder of her experience and as an educational tool for understanding how she had been manipulated and deceived. She used her knowledge of Morrison's methods to help other teenagers recognize the warning signs of manipulation and to seek help when they found themselves in similar situations. The case of Maya Chen and the diary that ended with tomorrow's date became a landmark study in the field of psychological manipulation and predatory behavior. It demonstrated the extraordinary sophistication of modern predators who use psychological techniques rather than physical force to control their victims, and it highlighted the critical importance of education, awareness, and community vigilance in protecting vulnerable teenagers from exploitation. Detective Martinez continued her career in law enforcement, using her experience with Maya's case to become a recognized expert in cases involving missing persons and crimes against children. She became a trainer and consultant for other law enforcement officers throughout the region, teaching them to recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and to understand the complex dynamics that can lead to seemingly voluntary disappearances. The diary itself became a subject of study by psychologists, criminologists, and law enforcement professionals interested in understanding the methods used by predators who exploit teenagers' natural vulnerabilities and psychological needs. The case demonstrated that the most effective and dangerous predators are often not those who use physical force or obvious coercion, but rather those who possess sophisticated understanding of human psychology and know how to make their victims believe that they are acting voluntarily and in their own best interests. As Maya Chen moved forward with her life, she carried with her the hard-won knowledge that she had survived something that could have destroyed her completely, and that she had found the inner strength and resilience to overcome the trauma of her experience. Her story became a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the critical importance of community support, professional help, and personal determination in helping victims of manipulation and exploitation recover from their experiences and rebuild their lives. The case served as a sobering reminder that truth is often far more complex and disturbing than it initially appears, and that the most dangerous predators are frequently those who understand how to exploit our deepest psychological needs, vulnerabilities, and desires. Maya's diary had seemed to predict the future with supernatural accuracy, but in reality, it had been a carefully crafted tool of manipulation, designed to make her believe that she was special, chosen, and destined for a higher purpose that required secrecy and sacrifice. The investigation into Maya's disappearance revealed that sometimes the most extraordinary and inexplicable events can be explained by the most ordinary human behaviors taken to their logical and disturbing extremes. Morrison's ability to predict and manipulate events had not been supernatural or mystical, but rather the result of careful planning, detailed observation, systematic manipulation, and a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and behavior. In the end, the diary that had seemed to end with tomorrow's date had actually been a comprehensive record of one person's systematic ability to manipulate and control another person's perception of reality, sense of self, and understanding of their place in the world. It had been a tool of deception rather than prediction, and its apparent accuracy had been the result of careful orchestration and psychological manipulation, rather than supernatural ability or genuine psychic powers.